Catherine and Brian. We're with the Marine Fisheries Ecology Group at Mississippi State. You may have seen us floating around the Dolphin Islands from time to time. What you guys see behind me is a bottom longline. So we're setting out today. We're trying to see if we can catch some sharks. Marcus is setting out the gear that he's been setting out for probably half of his life. It's the same exact gear type that we standardize our gear and we set it out the exact same way every time. So it's a commercial style gear. Usually people use it pelagic to catch things like swordfish and tuna. But in this case, our target is really trying to get some sharks. So we started out by kicking some buoys at our start point. We gave a little bit of line. I should mention that this monofilament you see going up here, it's 1,200 pound test monofilament. So it's super, super thick. It's 4 millimeters in diameter. And that's to be able to set a bunch out and hold steady if we ended up getting a bunch of sharks, which let's hope we do. We haven't had too much luck today, just catching a bunch of gap top sail catfish, which are not my favorite. So he set out the buoys, gave it a little space, set a weight because it's a bottom long line, so we want it on the bottom. And now he's just clipping what's called a gangin at every 60-foot intervals. So a gangin is a 12-foot long piece of 750 pound test monofilament with a tuna clip on one side and a 15-aught circle hook on the other. Woo! It's a little rough today. It's fine. We've baited them with Atlantic mackerel. We use the same, I just do this. We use the same gear or the same bait every single time so we can standardize. So, you know, if we mix up our gear or our bait type and we caught something different than we did the day before, you know, we can't guarantee that we've done the exact same sampling protocol and something that we changed has caused us to catch something different. So for reliability and standardization, we do the exact same thing every single time. So those 12-foot long gangins are getting clipped at 60-foot intervals. Think of a school bus or a pitcher to a catcher's mound. We'll put out 50 at one time. We'll put another weight down so it stays on the bottom. 50 more, another weight, and a buoy. And that'll actually be detached from the boat and that'll sit for an hour. After an hour, we bring it up through this hauling block right here. And any sharks or fish that get caught get passed along the gunnel for us to bring on board, and we've all been trained to safely handle them. We've got our lovely measuring table right here. So we just bring them up board. We take the exact same measurements every single time. We weigh, we tag, and we release. And that's the premise of it.
So what sharks do you typically look to catch on this?
Yeah. So our most common shark species in the Gulf is the Atlantic sharp-nosed shark. Some people call it a sand shark, which is actually a misnomer. There is no such thing as a sand shark. It's just a common term that local folks use to describe a shark often found in the sand. I think Greg talked about this a few weeks ago on one of his Facebook Live sessions. So a sharp-nosed shark gets to be about 3, maybe 4 feet long and is really identified by those beautiful white little speckles it has along its side. So a small shark, and it's ubiquitous, so we find it all over. We find it in the near shore, we find it offshore. Generally, that's what we tend to find. Like I said, we haven't had much luck today. That's partially due to our low salinity. We have less salt in the water, so it's fresher. We just got rain last night. We got rain last week. We're getting all this freshwater input coming out of Mississippi Sound and the Mississippi River and dumping into Mobile Bay and coming out. So that could be affecting what we catch. The other sharks we were hoping to see today are a black-tip shark. That one gets to be about 5 feet long. They're pretty cool. They've got this kind of like Zorro stripe along their side. They're often misidentified with spinner sharks. The way you can tell them apart is that there's a black tip on the anal fin. It's a spinner, which is kind of confusing because you would think it would be a black tip, but that's the case. A black tip's also a little bit bulkier, and a spinner is a little bit more sleek. Those are those sharks that if you catch them, they hit the line, they spin out of the water like that. We were hoping to see some stingrays today, some big southern stingrays. Those things can get quite wide, about 1 meter or even more in diameter. We haven't seen those today. Those are one of our more common rays here. We have several different, probably about 5 or so species of rays that we see routinely in this area. We saw some catfish. I mentioned we were hoping maybe we could see a little bull shark or a red drum, but you know, we'll just get what the ocean gives us.
So when
Gulf.
you bring a shark in and you weigh it and everything, what else do you do? You tag it?
Yeah. So 90% of the time we're tagging and releasing these sharks. We've got several different types of tags we use. We use these little plastic tags called roto tags. They're the same thing you may have seen in like a cattle or a sheep ear. So they're livestock tags. We also have spaghetti or dart or M tags. We've called them. They're like long little strands. Both of those tags are relatively cheap. They're plastic, so we can put out a whole bunch of them. But we rely on the help of anglers to report those recaps. So we've got our number on there. We've got our website. We've got a specific number for that shark. And so what we're really hoping, if anglers catch one of our sharks, that they'll add it to our tagging hotline. Where were they? What shark species was it? How big was it? And what that number is on that tag. And then we can get some sort of information on ideally growth, but movement and behavior like that. So most of the time we'll tag. Occasionally we'll also collect some samples for different projects we're working on. So it's really easy to take a tiny, tiny piece of their fin, their dorsal fin, and we can run genetic analysis on that. So we'll send it to some colleagues of ours who will investigate the different genetic structure of some of these species in this area. We also take things like muscle samples. Plug kind of looks like a little ice cream scoop. You just or blood. Both of those tissues can be really useful to help us kind of determine what diet, or at least give us some clues as to what these sharks are eating and where they're going without actually having to kill them, which is obviously great. So we'll sample them and we'll get them right back in the water. We do all this in a minute flat, 2 minutes tops.
So a couple of quick shout outs. We've got Somerville, Alabama, and New Iberia, Louisiana, and Huntsville, Alabama, and Chelsea, Alabama, all joining us right now to find out about this. So the shark research that you're doing with the tagging and the catch and release, how many years have y'all been doing this?
Yeah, this survey started in 2006, 2008. I've been here since 2015, I think. 2014? I don't know. Something like that. So it's been a long time series, but there's different projects around the U.S. and around the world, frankly, that have been doing these long-term monitoring programs. And that's really the goal of our program, is we go out and we do the same gear in the same general region during the same general time every single year, so we can monitor how our shark and predator populations are doing in the area. Are we catching fewer sharks than we did last year? Is the temperature higher? Is the oxygen lower? We take all sorts of metrics like that to be able to basically get a general idea of how our ecosystems are doing here in the Gulf.
And what's interesting is Dr. Drymon, who's setting the line right now, he's actually done a whole lot of what sharks can be found within the bay and inside the bay.
Correct.
Commonality.
Yeah.
So what is the most common shark that can be seen in Mobile Bay?
Oftentimes we'll catch those baby bull sharks in Mobile Bay. Again, I would be shocked if you wouldn't see a sharp-nosed shark. They just live everywhere. But Mobile Bay tends to be a bit fresher, and the shark species that can really tolerate that the best are these bull sharks. So it's theorized that the moms will go where it's fresher, drop the pups, and they'll move back offshore, or at least in the saltier waters, and those pups will hang in the water till they're big enough to come out on their own. But they're really one of the few documented species that have been shown to tolerate large fluctuations in salinity, so that saltiness of the water.
So Kevin asks, how intelligent are sharks? Are they good at memorizing things?
So if you look at a shark's brain, first of all, it's fascinating. They're not mindless killers. I always like to tell everyone they do have a brain. But the majority of their brain goes towards senses, right? So they're smelling, they're feeling to an extent, they're hearing, not quite in a similar way that you might think that humans do. They're looking, right? They're using their sight. So the majority of their brain goes towards using these different senses to help them be strong predators. So you've probably heard sharks have a sixth sense. That's their ampulla of Lorenzini. If you ever get close up to a shark, they've got all these tiny little pores around their snout. There's a little conductive jelly, similar to If a pregnant woman goes and gets an ultrasound, that similar jelly that they put on that belly, that's all along the shark's body. And so you can essentially think of it as the shark sitting here and can just sense the movement of prey as it's pushing water, as it's swimming, or maybe it's struggling. It can literally sense its food right over there, which I think is cool. You know, if I could sense that my hamburger was right down the street, that'd be great.
So what is, in the years that you've studied the sharks with Dr. Drymon, which you've been with him for a number of years now, what is the most interesting thing that you've seen?
I should have thought about this earlier when you asked me this earlier. We've seen a lot of really cool things out here. One time we pulled up a tiger shark that had a barn swallow in its mouth. They'd been hanging around our boat all night, and it must have just gotten tired and fell in the water, and the tiger shark ate it on its way up. That was really cool. A couple years ago, we were hauling up some of the gear, and we thought, well, what's that? Something is off and odd in our gear, and it was a tag. It was one of our dart tags, or our spaghetti tags, that we'd put on a shark several years earlier in Mississippi Sound. And somehow that tag, without the shark, made its way about 40 miles offshore, and we just caught the tag itself. It's crazy.
So, you do a lot of outreach on sharks throughout the communities. What is the most common question that you get that's a misconception about sharks?
There's a lot. The first question I always like to ask everybody is a shark a fish? Is a shark a mammal? Or is a shark a shark? It's its own thing entirely. Most of the time people don't realize that a shark is a fish. So they're related to our bony fish, so things like red snapper and red drum, things that have bones, except as many of you have probably heard, sharks don't have any bones. They have just cartilage. So sharks, skates, and rays are only made out of cartilage. Same thing in your nose and your ears. Brian, you mind grabbing numbers real quick? Thank you. Sorry. I'm bossy.
So sharks, rays, and snakes
are all related. So they're what we call elasmobranchs. And if you could take it a step back and even add in chimeras, if you've ever heard of that, or a ratfish, then they're all considered chondrichthian fish. So a shark is a fish, and they're closely related to a skate or a ray. And what's interesting is that if you've ever been on the beach and seen a mermaid's purse, in this part of this neck of the woods, it's an egg case from a skate. So a skate looks a lot like a ray. Sorry, I'm making sure I'm not missing anything here. But they lay eggs, and they don't have a barb like a stingray does. Stingrays also give live birth. Favorite shark fact that I usually get a lot of groans from is that female sharks have paired uteri. So they have two wombs you can think of, and they can be sired from multiple fathers, which is pretty cool.
So Carrie asked, how far out in the Gulf are we? If I can,
I was going to say, not.
we're not that far.
You can see Dolphin Island.
So that's Dolphin Island right there. We're not that far off. Right now, as a matter of fact, Sand Island is a little further far away from us. Can we wrap up?
It's a little bit rough out here.
A lot of stuff going on out here.
Got it?
What are we doing?
Yeah. So Mark is just about to squeeze over. That's the end of our long line set. I'm going to hit my stopwatch, and we have 1 hour while this gear soaks. And during that time, we're going to other variables. So we're going to use our YSI to measure the temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, depth of our water. That can kind of help us understand what species are going where, what they're preferring, things like that. After an hour, we'll haul everything back up.
All right, well, we'll say hey to Illinois who just hopped on. You can watch this at any point in time. Emily, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming out with us.